Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us once again here in the Treehouse. Before we start on this particular entry into our positive masculinity playlist, I wanted to issue a specific set of content warnings for this pair of episodes. We're very excited to talk about Alien and Aliens, and thank you to John and Amy for the suggestion. But as you may or may not know, these are films that deal very directly with issues such as sexual assault and forced pregnancy, and as a result, we spend a lot of time talking about these issues, as well as the many instances of sexual imagery in these movies, some of which are playful and funny, and some of which are decidedly not. So while there is a full list of content warnings in the show notes along with our source list, just like always, I wanted to provide this heads up at the top as well so you guys can make informed listening decisions. As always, if you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram or Facebook at A Safe Place for Boys, or email us at safeplaceforboys@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, stay safe out there, and enjoy the show. You know what else is a waste of tax money? Sending a bunch of Marines into space to die in a futile attempt to control the natural world.
We choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it is hard.
We choose to let our Marines die, even though a very sensible woman warned us that that was exactly what was going to happen. Not because it is easy, but because we're dumb as hell. Welcome to A Safe Place for Boys, compassionate conversations about masculinity in media. I am your host, Kelcee Sykes. With me, as always, is the perfect organism, Dr. Spencer Todd Bennington, PhD. How are you, Spencer?
I am a specimen.
You sure are.
A friend of mine said so proudly one time that they went to get a physical, and the doctor told them, and I quote, "You are a specimen."
What does that mean?
I don't know. I assume it's kind of like how the androids study the little horseshoe crab face huggers, and they're like, this is a perfect organism.
It says to me that the doctor wants to put you in a tube and study you, which I don't think is a compliment.
Of physical health.
Well, isn't any a specimen just means you're a unit of something that I'm measuring or studying.
Yeah.
This is just sort of you're a person.
You
Good
sure
job.
Are a species.
You exist. Way
Yeah.
to go.
You are part of the species.
I could study you if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I will just say I don't know that it is ever a compliment when someone is like, God, I want to study you.
Yeah.
I don't think it's good.
However, being the perfect organism primed only for hatred and destruction, now that is a compliment, so thank you.
Yeah, I don't think the aliens are powered by hatred. I think they're powered by
predation.
Yeah, I guess.
No, that's the predator, though. They don't like each other, I don't think.
Oh, they're rivals.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the aliens are much more sophisticated. They care about, the arts and stuff, I guess.
They're the most adaptable species, the xenomorph. That's their whole thing.
They just survive. It's what they do.
Yeah, survive. So they're the most perfect organism in terms of surviving any conditions, any environment, adapting to any circumstances. They evolve, they adapt.
Well, all of that is to say, we're back to talking about aliens and alien. Both of them.
I guess.
Well, we've been talking about xenomorphs. It counts. Listen, it's a lazy Sunday. We're all out here doing our best.
I just want to carve a pumpkin today.
Okay.
In the shape of a xenomorph.
Well, just make it look like a big penis with several small mouths that are also still kind of shaped like penises.
Maybe I'll make a predator instead.
The predator is just kind of like a guy, right?
I mean, it sort of looks like a dude with dreadlocks, I guess.
Yeah. So it's just sort of a man.
Yeah.
It's not great. So we said last time when we were talking about how we wanted to frame these two episodes that we were gonna, go through the plot rundown for both of them and then kind of do a comparing and contrasting. I think back when we recorded our sort of preview episode for this season, we said we were going to frame it as sort of an alien versus alien debate. I'm gonna be honest with you, I no longer feel compelled to do that. Mostly because, every article in the world is already framed as, is Alien or Aliens better? And it's just not an interesting question to me. And also because after doing all of this research, it's just I still have my personal opinion, but these two stories are doing such different things that it's not really worth trying to frame anything as a debate.
It's entirely irrelevant. The only constant is Ripley, and part of the reason I think that these movies have such a sort of rabid fan community, it's the directors are different, the genres of the two films are different, the production value is different, the sort of setting, context, larger themes are different. They're entirely different movies, and you're allowed to like whichever or both. You don't have to compare them. It's not a competition. This is the nature of sequels, I guess.
Yeah, I think there is some connective tissue between the two of them, and that is going to be sort of what we talk about. But functionally, our discussion today is going to be what's great about Alien, and then what's great about Aliens. And what do we think these two movies, either separately or together, have to say about questions of gender?
And then you can call or text with your vote for Alien Idol. Which do you think is better? And who should get a record contract with Fantasia Barrino at the end of the season?
It's just going to be Ripley. She's going to win every time.
I'd hope so.
It pays to be the only one who lives. So let's start with Alien. And I am going to talk a lot now because I did a lot of research about Alien, and then a little later I'll turn the floor over a little bit more to Spencer. But I think Alien is great. I think it's a great movie. I think on the level of craft there is a lot to like. I kind of like that it is the more minimalist of the two, and I like that there is a little bit more room for the characters to sort of breathe. The pacing is really slow, particularly at the beginning. And I think one of the best parts is that opening sequence, that slow pan through the ship while the title is sort of fading in one line at a time. And I really like luxuriating in the weirdness of this ship. It's, in my mind, kind of a character in and of itself. We talked last time about how so much of the interior of this ship ends up looking like it's just made of aliens, where, it's got all of the tubes and everything is sort of black and vaguely dark and shiny the same way that the alien is. Even before we are introduced to the xenomorphs, we get this sense that this would be such an easy ship for something to hide within, because there are so many just nooks and crannies. There's no light except in a few very specific rooms, and it's very claustrophobic. Most of the time we see these characters moving throughout the ship, it's very enclosed and it's very dark, and so you're in a place of being off kilter right from the beginning. And I like how normal this crew of people is in this space. I feel like that's kind of a 70s aesthetic a little bit. I don't know a lot about filmmaking, but it felt like the mood in the 70s was just make people look as much like normal people as possible. We hadn't gotten into the kind of glam of the 80s yet. So these people, when they first wake up, they just look like some people-ass people. John Hurt looks like he just woke up. And none of these people are bombshell hot either. These are just the most average space or refinery drivers you ever did see. I don't really know they're transporting it. I don't know. They're not miners.
I think these are space truckers.
Yeah. There's so many character moments that I like. Especially in the early part of this movie. We don't get a ton of background information about any of these characters. That becomes a bit of a problem when we learn more about Ripley later. the things that we do see just in these characters interacting with each other, like at the breakfast table or as the story progresses, feels so realistic. And it's not one of the slashers from like the 80s and 90s where it's full of these just horrible caricature characters. I don't want to watch Parker and Brett die. I like watching them like joke with each other, and I like them. I feel like they're realistic, and that's what sort of grounds this otherwise very like weird, dark universe full of dark tubes. Is the people within the tubes are just like some guys. Like Dallas is just a guy who wants to go to his job and do the job and go home and collect his paycheck. Like even characters like Lambert, who people don't like, she's a very human person reacting to a very scary situation in very understandable ways. If you were in her shoes, you would also be screaming and crying. You just would. For me, what makes this an interesting horror movie is that the characters feel like real people and not just fodder to be fed into a wood chipper. That's not what we'll see as the Alien franchise progresses. There will be some people fed into wood chippers. But of course, the best part of Alien, by a pretty significant margin, I think, is Ripley. Would you agree with that?
I mean, tied with Jonesy, I guess.
Yeah. Jonesy is just sort of a truly neutral agent in this movie. He just sort of moves throughout it, causing problems, but not really being particularly impacted by any of those problems. And the person who has to deal with all of those problems is Ripley. So this was Sigourney Weaver's first major film role. Sigourney Weaver is kind of a Nepo baby. Both of her parents are in the entertainment industry. But before this movie came out, she'd mostly done like theater and smaller TV appearances and things like that. No one would have looked at this cast list when the movie first came out and assumed that she was going to be the main character. I think it's a fun thought experiment to think about this movie in terms of what it would have felt like for an audience member who had not been raised under the shadow of Ellen Ripley or Sigourney Weaver as an actress, who would have had to sort of slowly realize over the course of the movie, as these more famous actors start falling one by one, that this person they've never heard of before is suddenly the main character. But even for those of us who did grow up knowing about this movie and knowing about Ripley and already thinking of Ripley as someone who is cool, it's still, there's a bit of a magic trick in this movie to watching her kind of come into her own over the course of the movie. And part of that comes from the fact that she is not a particularly like self-conscious character. So all of the characters in this movie were written as sort of unisex placeholder names that could have been filled by either male or female actors. And in the end, only 2 of them were cast as women, which was based on a suggestion to Ridley Scott from the then president of 20th Century Fox, who was named Alan Ladd Jr., which I only bring up because I think it's funny that the person who suggested that Ripley be a woman had the last name of Ladd. And in an interview with Deadline, Sigourney Weaver kind of talks about this choice that they made to cast Ripley as a woman in a script where that was not necessarily required. Would you mind reading that quote for me, Spencer?
Sure. What I love about it, which I think endures, is that the character of Ripley is almost an everyman character. Most of the characters are written as unisex so they could be played by male or female actors. That freed me up from ever having to act like a girl or dress like a girl. That was very astute of the writers. At a certain point, you even forget that it's a woman. You just know it's Ripley, and you're hoping she survives. What the heck does that mean?
I mean, I don't know that I ever particularly forget that Ripley is a woman. Did you at any point while watching?
No, I mean, I guess I just wouldn't have phrased it that way. I mean, I get it. You're getting interviewed and people, you have to think on your feet a little bit, but forget that it's a woman. No.
I think she's speaking from the point of view of an actress who, like a lot of woman written by a man roles, especially in like action and sci-fi. Like think of like Megan Fox in Transformers. You have a person in a pretty high stakes action movie setting who is still just like running around in high heels and a push-up bra. And, you can't ever for a single second as an actress forget that you are portraying a woman as imagined by a man.
Okay, Megan, so we're going to take lunch here in just a second. Let's just get a few more shots of you slowly mounting that motorcycle. Yeah, that camera's going to go straight up your butt. Okay.
Yeah, could we get a hose in here?
A little more sweat on Megan.
It's not, the tank top's not see-through enough, boys. Can we bring in the fire hose, actually?
Yeah, I guess I see what you mean.
Yeah, so I imagine as an actress that it feels very different to portray a character who is not written with a lot of that male writer imagining a woman baggage, or even female writer imagining a woman baggage, because that exists too.
And she sat down on the toilet for an interminable amount as the urine slowly snaked its way through her labyrinthine tubes of the female body.
Not a joke. You can look that up. That is 100% real.
Would it ever come, she wondered.
Yeah. Men have it so easy. Their bodies are so straightforward. The urine just comes right out. But I have to spend half my day just sitting there waiting.
Pleading, even.
Yeah, so we don't have, like, Ripley running around in a Wonder Bra, breasting boobily down the stairs or whatever.
Couldn't wear a bra in space because the wire would, the gravity and the wire would probably strangle her. So here, wear this metallic bikini for Jabba the Hutt instead.
Yeah, she doesn't have the Princess Leia baggage. What do you mean? Hey, George? Chewbacca's got a strap around his body and he never gets strangled by it. Why would Princess Leia get strangled by her bra?
Yeah.
No, you just want to be able to see your actress's nipples at all times. Fantastic, George. Mm-hmm. So we're avoiding a lot of those problems. I think that's probably what Sigourney Weaver is talking about in that quote. But I, as a viewer, do not agree that you forget that Ripley is a woman. It strikes me as a viewer as kind of a relief to not have to, like, sort through all of that garbage. It would have bummed me out a lot if at some point she had to put on a metal bikini. I'll just say that. That would have ruined it for me.
It's important to distinguish here that, okay, you're a writer writing a script. You create characters, but intentionally don't enforce gender on them. Mm-hmm. You create characters with motives, with some, templated backgrounds, and that react to situations in a way that a logical character would. Okay, great. Now we're going to go look for actors. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we lock in on those actors and we have a cast, okay, let the actors do their job, right? Let the actors behave and enact the script as they would. That's level 2. But level 3 comes with the viewing audience, because now suddenly the viewing audience, different generations, like the viewing audience that first watched this movie in theaters compared to us, or like people watching this for the first time, are then putting their own ideas about gender and sexuality and the power dynamics therein onto the film. And I think, like, when you keep talking about this, like, unisex character thing, it strikes me as odd because there's no viewing experience where I can see Sigourney Weaver as Ripley taking orders from Dallas or the fucking robot and, like, not see it as a gendered power dynamic.
Absolutely.
Because as soon as that cast is there and as soon as I'm watching it, 21st century male me, it's there. I'm projecting that onto the film and imbuing that meaning myself. And I can't, like, I challenge anyone to watch a movie and not bring their own, presuppositions about gender or power or anything onto that text. Like, that you just can't. Like,
yeah.
So,
in fact, I think that's what makes this movie so interesting, is that there are these gender dynamics happening that the script is not bringing explicit attention to. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but no one is ever saying, like, Ripley couldn't be in charge, she's a woman. But there is a little bit of that operating in the background because of the way the actors carry themselves and because of the sort of mental picture we all bring of what it means for a woman to be in charge into our viewing experience. And so we can read into that without the script having to sit down and be like, well, you see, this guy doesn't like her because he's a misogynist, you see. This is not a PSA.
No. And, like, just to put my old literary criticism hat on, I suppose this is why, like, when you learn to study literature, you talk about what we call the intentional fallacy. Like, it's a mistake to assume that the only way to interpret something is based on the writer, in this case, the script writer's intent. What did they intend for us to think about gender? Doesn't matter. What did the actors intend for it? Doesn't matter. What matters is what we as readers and viewers bring to the film, because we are co-constructing meaning of Alien. And that's why some films endure, some text, some literature, music endures, because it has something new or at least interesting to say to multiple generations, or at least has something that it is reacting to that is like persistent in our culture. And that's what we call reader response criticism, Kelcee.
Yep. I'm aware of that. I've been a reader my whole life. So one thing that we can say for a script that was written without specific genders for any of the characters in mind is that when you don't have the tropes to rely on, the like hysterical woman versus stoic man or whatever, you kind of have to fill each of these characters in with their own actual personalities, which is the sort of benefit of writing this way. And in Ripley, we see her biggest sort of benefit and flaw as a person is that she has this sort of earnest belief in justice. And this, is sort of the backbone of her integrity, and also a thing that, at least in the context of this movie, gets her into some trouble. Other characters kind of come into this story already kind of cynical. People like Brett and Parker, or they come in and they're like sort of stupidly optimistic like Kane, who has this sort of like, I can stick my head down this hole and nothing bad will happen to me, sort of really unrealistic optimism. And all of those characters are willing to act a little bit more recklessly as a result. But Ripley, as we said in the previous episode, is like a real rule follower. And she is like blindsided by people who don't follow the rules. And so when other people start breaking the rules, she kind of flounders for a bit, because she's like, well, I was taught this certain way to do things and we would follow this procedure and it would progress from one step to the other and everything would be fine. And now people aren't doing what they're supposed to do and people are panicking and behaving in ways that I don't understand. And so she really isn't a particularly effective leader until she gets that confirmation from Mother that the company has betrayed them, because in the back of her mind the whole time is like, I work for the company has set forth these rules, they wouldn't have done that without a good reason. If I just follow the rules, everything will be fine. When people start breaking the rules, I just have to try to course correct them and get them back on course, and then everything will be fine. And then she goes and talks to Mother, and Mother says, no, the company doesn't care if you live or die. The company sent you out here to die. You can follow the rules all you want. It's not going to help you. And this idea of like a just universe that she has been clinging to hasn't just been tainted by like Kane being foolish, basically, or Ash being disrespectful. The whole world surrounding her is dictated by malicious actors. And only when she can kind of accept that does she become effective as a leader at all. And that is a really interesting dynamic to me.
Ripley has faith in systems because she has faith in people. And she assumes that other people are going to be like her and go back for the cat. Or that they believe that only by working together and collaborating can we actually achieve anything. Contrast her with Parker and Brett, who don't have faith in systems because they know how they behave. They know that most people are probably like them and quote a job at, 24 to 28 hours when they just discussed how it would really only take them 12, because they think that they're always getting the sort of raw end of the deal anyway. And so they're willing to cheat other people out of time or money or whatever. This is a good example of characters sort of behaving the way that they do. And maybe it was written, maybe it wasn't, but like Kane being so optimistic that he literally sticks his head in an unknown tube to get face hugged. As soon as that's played by a man, we think, oh, of course, you think you can just go into unknown territory and literally put your face where it doesn't belong and you'll be just fine because that's been your life experience. Like, this is your sort of prerogative based on a lifetime of being a dominant figure. Whereas someone like Ripley has had to trust in systems of people working together to protect one another. Presumably. And so like we're already getting a gendered reading there. She has this crisis of like going from believing in people working together, thus creating systems that are designed to protect people, and sort of slowly realizing, like, oh no, these systems are created and reinforced by people who are looking to exploit people.
Yeah.
They're looking to protect themselves through the sort of like machinery of systems instead of the collaborative sort of like human unity of systems.
And once she can kind of see the truth behind the system, that's where a lot of her character work has to happen, because she has that moment of, well, do I behave selfishly? Do I act the way that the company would expect me to act? Or do I try to do something a little bit more humanitarian? I like that what we see from Ripley in the back half of Alien is that she is trying to behave in a human way, but ultimately acting kind of stupid, in the way that, like, horror movie victims generally do act stupid, because when you're in that sort of primal place of panic and you're trying hard to cling to an idea that is unraveling around you, what it turns into is sending her coworkers off alone and then going off by herself to find a cat. Because what she can cling to in that moment is there is another living thing on this ship that if I don't go and protect it will die, and so I should go and protect it, even if it means I'm sacrificing sort of more rational, logical goals. And I think Sigourney Weaver also sort of felt that. So we have another quote from the Deadline interview about that aspect of Ripley's character, if you wouldn't mind reading it for me.
On Alien, I felt that Ripley was improvising her way through this situation. And I think the most important decision I probably made was becoming good buddies with co-star Ian Holm. I remember saying to him very early on, "Gosh, do you think Ripley thinks what she's doing is the right thing?" And he said, "Oh, I do, absolutely." I said, "I don't. I don't think she knows." So the whole time, I'm hoping I'm doing the right thing. I have no certainty about it, which puts your character into a kind of free fall that I think was very helpful for me.
That, I think, is a good way of thinking about the sort of horror movie problem of, you know, people running up the stairs instead of out the front door or whatever, because you as a viewer are always looking at that as like, why would a person do that? That's so stupid. You know, the reason we don't understand why people act that way in horror is because a lot of times in horror, the characters just like have no real personality to speak of. And so it's just sort of like, well, I need to prolong this chase sequence, so I'm going to go to a place where I'll be easily caught as opposed to a place where I'll easily escape, because then the movie will be over. Whereas with Ripley, we have somebody who is floundering in that same way, but keeps sort of reaching back for these principles that are sort of slowly but steadily failing her. And it's interesting that we see that in other characters too. You know, you were talking about how Parker he has an understanding of the world that Ripley doesn't. He sort of knows that people are out just to protect themselves and that the systems will not protect him. If he doesn't advocate for himself, no one will. But when it comes right down to it, what is the warning that he gets from Dallas?
Don't be a hero.
Don't be a hero. Nothing that he has said in the movie up to that point would lead you to believe that Parker is a person who is inclined to sacrifice himself for the good of others. Everything that he has said in the movie up to that point is like, I don't want to go and help those other people. All I care about is how much I'm going to get paid. I'm not going to do extra work for no extra money. But when it comes right down to it, his tendency is still to pursue self-sacrifice if it means he can help somebody else. We see it with Dallas, too. Dallas is not a person who wants to put in any extra effort, but when they're like, somebody needs to go up into the vents, even though he is very frightened, he does it anyway, knowing that, like, he's probably gonna die, but somebody has to do it. So that is just sort of a theme of people sacrificing themselves in this horrifying scenario, not because they're stupid necessarily, but because the inhumanity of the situation around them is so intense that they're just falling back on foolhardy acts of heroism.
That's another way that I can't view this movie without thinking about gender. I wonder how much these men are behaving this way because there are women subordinates still around that they feel like they have to infantilize or protect. And like, if they've already just been pre-programmed by various media to be the lone cowboy gunman last stand, it's me against the world, because they both just end up acting on that sort of patriarchal instinct and going off on their own and just getting killed because men are told that's like the best thing you can do is go and die for people, I guess, you know?
Well, and that's what makes Lambert as a character so interesting. It means something that is the other female character, and that her refrain this whole time is looking at the men in her life and being like, that's dangerous. Yeah. We shouldn't do it.
Right.
And them not listening to her and getting hurt in the, if not exact way that she predicted they would, a way that she could have predicted they would. We don't need to be intrepid explorers. We don't need to split up and go hunting. We should stay together. We should get more information before we go out into the world. Of course, no one listens to her and they all die. But yeah, she and Ripley look sort of like quote unquote selfish by comparison because they don't go out and try to sacrifice themselves for any of their coworkers, but they also live a lot longer than many of their coworkers. Like Ripley makes it to the end and Lambert almost does. So there's something to that.
And I would definitely push back on, I don't think it's selfish at all to not risk your, like, to just not volunteer as sacrifice. That's selfish. To me, you're obviously lowering the overall probability that the group will survive by just like feeding yourself to the monster or the machine instead of sticking together and doing what Ripley wanted to do from the beginning, which was abide by a system that is designed to protect people. Yeah. And not exploit them or feed them or fuck them. Like, and because like that's all that mother and presumed father are doing. That's the game they play.
Yeah, they are ultimately the two characters who are looking around the group and saying, all of your lives are valuable. I would like to stop gambling with them. Yeah. That's the tragedy at the heart of Alien, is that no one listens to them until it's too late. I mean, on that note, how do you think your experience of this movie would have changed if Ripley had been played by a man?
I don't know. I'm trying to imagine it's like, okay, it's Bruce Willis in this role instead. You know, yippee-ki-yay, alien motherfucker, and then he blasts off to safety. I don't know. I guess it just would have been forgettable. Maybe I wouldn't. This is me being sexist. I guess I just wouldn't have been as afraid. I wouldn't have been as afraid if it were a sort of strapping cowboy figure, because in my mind I would think, oh, well, this isn't a horror movie. This is an action movie, and this guy is just gonna go against all odds and show these aliens what for in a final Steven Seagal sort of battle sequence where they slap each other around with poles or something. I don't know.
As much as Ripley is not characterized as particularly feminine, like, she has a vulnerability to her. The fact that Ash is able to like overpower her and assault her the way that he does, like, speaks to the fact that, well, she presumably has a lot of like book learning and training. She's not a particularly, I mean, she is physically strong. We find out that she is wildly unrealistically physically strong, but she doesn't look physically strong, especially in the first one. And so there is an unspoken vulnerability that comes with a woman, whereas with a male protagonist, the question is like, well, could he be physically overpowered? And if so, in what way? Instead of, well, she could just be physically overpowered immediately, so what is she gonna do to get out of this?
Yeah, like, like, if it's Bruce Willis, I'm thinking, okay, how is he going to fight this alien? When it's Sigourney Weaver, I'm like, how is she going to survive? Yeah. What? Because, like, fighting's off the table. She's not going to fight this alien. Yeah. And again, that's me being sort of pre-programmed by, I don't know, just various sexist media telling me who's the hero and who's a victim and you know, the sort of like routes that are available for various characters. But I don't know. Is that bad? Is that shit? Well, no. Am I the problem?
No, I think that like part of the magic trick of this movie, though, is that the male characters are kind of presented the same way. We don't have like a big, strong, strapping Rambo in this movie. No. We have John Hurt, character actor. We have Harry Dean Stanton, who's built like a beanpole, and we have Tom Skerritt, who has beautiful hair but is not particularly physically imposing. Like, none of those men either come across as particularly strong. I mean, the first time we see them, it's John Hurt who just woke up and he's sleepy and he's in his underwear and he's a thin little guy. Those are the male heroes. So it's subverting that expectation as well. It's saying, like, there's no Rambo here. So even if one of these men was the main character, the dynamic is probably still more or less the same. They just put a female character in the lead role, so you can't try to, like, think of the alien as a thing that you can fight. Right. The alien it's like a Michael Myers type force. You can't fight it, you just gotta try to get away from it, and that's the best you're gonna be able to do.
This is why, ultimately, I think I and viewers like me enjoy Aliens a little bit more, because you don't have to do this thought experiment of, like, okay, well, what if it weren't just beanpoles and women on this ship? What if it were some trained badass motherfuckers with some semi-automatic plasma rifles?
What if Bill Paxton was here?
But, like, this first movie came out before the advent of the 80s action hero. It very much existed in a landscape of Westerns, you know? Like, yeah, we have Western heroes. We have your Clint Eastwoods of the world. And, like, it's interesting to think, like, okay, well, what if one of these people had a gun? But they don't. And so...
Well, and you can't shoot a gun. They designed the alien so that the gunslinger wouldn't do you any good. If Clint Eastwood was there, he would just get you killed.
Yeah, he'd get acid-faced. And we see that in Aliens, you know? And Aliens directly addresses what would it look like to have male, macho, you know, Rambo-esque protagonists face off against these things. And I think the reason I like that movie a lot is because it, in your face, says they would be screwed. They would be absolutely screwed. Do not fool yourself for a second. This is not a villain to fight. This is an overwhelming force that represents something much darker in terms of patriarchy, colonialism, imperialism, and just capitalism writ large. Like, this is not something that one strong dude that does a lot of pull-ups can defeat. And that is the most horrifying thing for men like me that love Batman and Green Arrow. And it's like, God, if he just did 2 more pull-ups, though, he could probably go save the world, the whole world. If he slapped
the surface of the water, he would develop his reflexes.
Just work those traps, baby. Like, we want simple solutions. We want great heavyweights to show us that the battles between, you know, right and wrong can be fought in a ring. And that's the horrible fantasy of being a man. Like,
yeah. For me as a female viewer, that's what makes Alien, again, in my personal opinion, a much more interesting movie of the two, because I have never gone into a movie with the assumption that I would be able to outfight anything. So it is interesting to see a movie where, quote unquote, female expertise is so important to our understanding, especially of the threat. So we talked a little bit earlier about how sexism shows up in this movie despite the fact that none of the characters were written specifically to be women or men. And for me personally, again, who doesn't need Megan Fox's titties in my face to be like, oh, this is a movie with women in it. I think it's much more interesting than more overt sexism. Alien is a movie, and in fact, this whole franchise, in more or less explicit ways, is about bodily autonomy and violation. There are obvious parallels to pregnancy and childbirth, and especially in Alien, to the violence inherent in those processes, by showing this sort of non-typical birthing body being impregnated via a process that very strongly resembles sexual assault. So, apologies in advance. We're going to talk a lot about sexual assault for the next couple of minutes. In this case, Kane, who is a man, a cis man as far as we know, has an inseminating organ shoved down his throat, and then his body is ripped apart. And so, you know, we have returned pretty strongly to the thematic realm of the monstrous feminine, even if the alien itself is coded as male. We don't know for sure if this alien is male or female. Ash just decides it's male. I certainly am not going to ask it what its pronouns are. It's got a lot of mouths. Maybe each mouth has its own pronouns. I don't know. And what they do is sexually assault cis men and get them pregnant against their will, which is the backbone of the horror of this movie. But female viewers, especially people like myself who already have an established fear of those things, don't see the chestburster scene as particularly hyperbolic. Pregnancy and childbirth are very dangerous physical processes, and at least in this country, just getting more dangerous over time. And pregnancy is absolutely something that can be forced upon you against your will if you have a viable uterus. Again, more so over time. So the horror in Alien for me isn't just, wouldn't it be crazy to be stuck in space with a scary monster? It's, what if you were stuck in space with a scary monster, the nature of which you, as Ellen Ripley woman, perfectly understand, and all of the people around you are refusing to listen to you. And we talked back in the Jurassic Park episode about the sort of tragedy of men who require some kind of violent action to happen, either to them or to someone they love, in order to take action to care about the people around them, right? There was the father who didn't think he should be spending any time with his kids until someone brought, like, a weapon to one of their schools, and then he was like, oh no, I should probably pay attention to what's going on in my children's lives. And that is what happens to the men in this movie. If they understood the horror of bodily violation and all the consequences that can follow from it, they might have deferred to Ripley's wisdom or listened to Lambert's completely reasonable concerns and had a much better chance of survival sooner. But because you don't think when you leave the house as a cisgendered man that someone is going to assault and impregnate you, why would it occur to you to try to protect yourself against that sort of thing? And that is why, in my mind, it is so smart that Ripley was cast as a woman, because while most of the men in this movie are dismissive and sort of patronizing towards her, there is one overwhelmingly callous and violent force in this story, and it does very deliberately choose a masculine face to represent itself on the Nostromo, and that is, we mentioned earlier, Daddy Corporation. It's Weyland-Yutani. So we learned that they sent Ash at the last minute to replace whatever science officer was supposed to be on this trip. And that kind of squares for us as viewers with the sexist insubordination we see from him throughout the early parts of the movie. So he's dragging his feet when Ripley is trying to get him to give her information. He's violating the quarantine protocol specifically against Ripley's orders. You know, he refuses to dispose of the alien material when she tells him to. He won't show her what he's working on in his lab. Again, maybe this is just me as a woman who has been in a workplace before, but that all felt to me very like company man refusing to cooperate with the person in charge because she happens to be a woman. Mm-hmm. Like, I've just seen that kind of stuff in workplaces before where I've had female managers and I've just had male coworkers just deliberately do things wrong and deliberately disobey them and refuse to give them information and just generally be difficult just because they don't like that a woman is telling them what to do. And this, it kind of works as a really handy cover-up for the fact that Ash is in fact not a man, because he's not a human, and his goal is not to, cause problems for her. His goal is to bring the alien back to the company and to sacrifice the crew if necessary. And Ripley doesn't figure any of that out until it's too late, because sexism is such a handy disguise for someone in that position. Dallas trusts him inherently more than he trusts Ripley, because men are socialized to trust other men more than women, even entirely reasonable women. It doesn't occur to Ripley that there's some kind of grander conspiracy happening, because male insubordination is so typical that it doesn't seem particularly strange to her that he's being difficult until several people are dead. And then she looks around and she's like, men can be pretty terrible at work sometimes, but we don't usually have multiple dead bodies piling up. Maybe there's something more going on here than just a man being difficult. And then, of course, you have the fact that Ash, as an android, is trying to imitate human man behavior by imitating sexist practices. So, he puts up naked pictures of women in his workstation. Presumably, he has no real interest in those pictures. He just has seen that is a thing that human men do And so he does it, and then he tries to kill Ripley in this very, like, bizarre, pseudo-sexual way. Why would an android do that if he was not trying to imitate something specific? And maybe he's trying to just imitate the alien, because he saw the alien do that earlier and it seemed pretty effective. But given that the alien is a metaphor for sexual assault, one way or another, Ash is like, what's the best way to get this job done? Imitate sexual assault.
I like to think that the android here and the reason it malfunctions are all pretty similar to what we see in contemporary technologies where, like, Chat GPT and various other AI things are a good one, where it's like, okay, you program something with an algorithm, it collects enough information, and then suddenly the program is racist and sexist and does all this. Why is it doing that? Well, because so many of the inputs, whether they be latent or direct, are coming from biased human sources that are, what you know it, racist and sexist. And so sooner or later, the machine learns to emulate some of those practices, even if it's not directly coded in. Like, the Weyland-Yutani Corp did not program the Mandroid to, primary directive, secure alien specimens. Secondary directive, put nudie photos up in your, your workstation.
Really put Ripley in her place.
But there's something embedded in those algorithms and those codes that are designed to simulate humanity, masculinity, that would allow some of those behaviors and idiosyncrasies to bubble up to the surface. And I think it's such an interesting little through line for this whole series that there are updated androids throughout. They're all men. There's never a female android. They're all mandroids, I think.
That's telling.
Yeah, and like...
Well, if you made a female one, people would just try to have sex with it.
Sure. The other thing is, like, when you think about the kind of sexist arguments that sort of rear up in the workplace, it tends to revolve around this idea of, like, what's the most logical thing? So, like, men are supposed to be paragons of logic, whether or not that means it's cold and calculating, and the best man, according to the scientific revolution, would be the closest thing to an instrument, a machine, that could really just process these calculations without all of these irrational concerns, all of these sort of, what's the awful word? Uterus. Hysterics. All of these female hysterics,
I did not know where you were going with that.
Well, that's where we get the word hysteria from.
Oh, I know that.
So I mean, you say, like, his sexism is hidden because of the context, and it's like, well, yeah, but it's also sort of like what we come to expect in a male and female dynamic in a workplace, is you have that trope or that topos to fall back on of, like, no, well, I'm just trying to be logical here, and, like, you're just being a little emotional, lady. And it's like,
Oh, yeah. I don't think it's a coincidence that the science officer is the one they replaced with the android, because you would just expect that from a male scientist, that, okay, he's going to roll his eyes at me when I try to get him to, explain to me what he's doing. He's going to tell me I couldn't possibly understand, that I'm not smart enough. Like, he's not going to come right out and say that, but he's going to find a coded way to say that. And we see Ash doing all of those things because that's his disguise. I think they try to do something sort of similar to this in Aliens with Carter, because he is the sort of agent of the company acting in that story. The problem with him is that he is just an actual human man, and so he is actually just very condescending, like earnestly condescending towards Ripley and earnestly dismissive in a way that she just clocks immediately. There's no obfuscation. At no point in the story do we trust Carter Burke. And so they can't pull off that same element of surprise twice because, first of all, Ripley as a character is never going to trust anybody again. But also, human men now, the sexism just reads as so obvious.
It's interesting, though. Like, she does convince herself that she trusts him, but that's not true. She just, like, desperately, like, when she makes that midnight phone call to him, FaceTimes him or whatever, and is like, you have to promise me that we're going there to kill them. And of course that's what he says, and of course she wants to believe him, but we all know.
Yeah, it doesn't work as a twist a second time. She's sort of disappointed but not surprised.
Right.
And I didn't even have it in me to be disappointed, because as soon as it was like, I'm Carter, I'm from the company, but don't hold that against me, I was like, I'm gonna hold that against you, Carter.
Yeah.
I don't like you.
You're the enemy.
Yeah.
I am mad about you. Carter.
Yeah, if anything, the twist in Aliens is that the android doesn't turn on them this time.
Well, yeah, that's the whole twist, and
Yeah.
all they're doing is relying on the twist of the first movie, which is like, oh, we got you. It's that you thought it was going to be the same. It's not. It's the opposite. It's just, this is like a functioning one. Cool.
Yeah, well, in all ways, sort of the Aliens mirrors Alien, where in Alien you see Ripley moving from a place of believing that she is part of a particular sort of community that operates a certain way to understanding that she is sort of on her own, and if any good is going to be done in the world, she's the one who's going to have to do it. And that's where she starts Aliens, whereas over the course of Aliens, she forms these connections with other people and sort of learns that there are like-minded people out there, and, she can actually form the kind of community that she thought she was a part of in the first movie if she finds people like Newt and Hicks and Bishop to a certain extent who can sort of mirror her beliefs back to her.
It's interesting. She's an interesting character because, like, her faith in humanity doesn't wane, but her belief in systems is absolutely eroded in the second movie.
Yes.
So much so that she's willing to, like, kick the commanding officer out of the comm and, like, ram the truck into the nuclear reactor to save people, because she does believe in people, but she also recognizes that there are agents of systems who are too far removed from that human connection, that the further and further they get up the corporate ladder or up the military hierarchy or wherever, that they start to believe that real people, Ripley, Newt, Hicks, are expendable and that they can be traded in like some kind of a currency.
They need a human to go out there to give the alien something to kill so that they can get a living alien.
I'll pay you 20 Marines for a specimen.
Yeah.
That I can then turn into a test tube, that I can then turn into so many nuclear warheads.
That I can then turn into a serum that I can inject into a pregnant woman and force her to give birth to a weird alien baby hybrid man with a human nose for some reason. Once again, we cannot talk about Romulus. But yeah, this kind of transitions nicely into the sort of last point that I have about Alien, and I apologize. I went all in on Alien. I'm sorry. It was the one I wanted to research, and I found lots of things to talk about. So we mentioned briefly the monstrous feminine, and I do want to talk about it because that is why this series was sort of mentioned to us as something that's worth talking about, because this is one of the most popular examples of monstrous feminine, that if you are to look up monstrous feminine thought and writings, you'll find a lot of writing about Alien. Which is interesting because there are, in my mind, sort of two examples of monstrous feminine figures, and you don't actually see either of them on screen. So the first is the mama alien. She's not in this one. We'll see her later. But in Alien, she is nonetheless a force to be reckoned with. And I'm getting this directly from Barbara Creed. So she has a chapter in her book, Monstrous Feminine, all about Alien, and I read it. And I'm going to talk about it because she says some interesting things. So she characterizes the feminine force behind this alien attack. And we know there must be a feminine force because we see a room full of eggs, right? And again, we're speaking sort of stereotypically about male and female bodies here. We mean cis female for the most part when we're talking about laying eggs. And Barbara Creed characterizes this feminine force as the archaic mother, which in her words is, quote, the mother as primordial abyss, the point of origin and of end. And so while we never see the specific alien that laid all of the eggs in this movie, the movie signals her presence to us in what Creed calls primal scenes, or representations of the scene of birth in relation to the other forms of copulation and death. So there are, according to Barbara Creed a number of representations of birth in this movie that are not what we as human people think of as sort of standard scenes of reproduction. Specifically, Creed points to 4 sort of permutations of this primal scene. So the first one that she points to is that opening sequence where the camera is moving through these very dark, very narrow corridors before it ends in this sort of opened up white room with all the pods in it, where mother comes and wakes up all of her beautiful children who have been asleep in their little egg pods. And there is, in fact, sort of a theme in this movie of there being these very dark, narrow, sometimes very damp tubes that then open up into these lovely white rooms where horrible, horrible things happen. The second one is the scene of Dallas, Kane, and Lambert entering the crashed ship. And just in case you thought me and Spencer were being gross last time when we talked about the dildo ship with its weird vagina openings, we were not the only ones who came up with that. So Barbara Creed describes that ship in this way. Quote, "They enter through a vaginal opening, which is shaped like a horseshoe, with its curved sides like 2 long legs spread apart at the entrance." Mm-hmm. So, in fact, we were being classy, if you think about it, because we could have described it like that. So the ship is meant to be read that way. That is not just us. The third one, of course, is the scene of Kane taking the face hugger to the helmet and ultimately to his face. So his body becomes sort of grotesque in that moment by taking on a characteristic that is traditionally reserved for female bodies, specifically being penetrated, which is not supposed to happen to a man, gosh darn it. And then the last one is this sort of theme recurring through the movie of smaller ships exiting larger ships. We joked briefly about that scene where they're first detaching the ship from the refinery and they say like, oh, we've cleared the umbilicus or whatever. So again, all of this was intentional. It was meant to be read that way. And each of those scenes are these sort of twisted versions of more idyllic scenes of reproduction and birth, either because birthing bodies become grotesque in the case of Kane, where traditionally we talk about childbirth as this beautiful natural process. Kane's is not that way. It is very violent and upsetting. Or because we see a birthing body, quote unquote, become dangerous to its offspring, such as the ship that Ripley has to escape at the end because A, it has an alien in it that's trying to kill her, and B, it's about to blow up. Creed argues that the alien mother as archaic mother represents a sort of monstrous version of the mother creator myth. Think of like Mother Earth as this sort of pre-human, loving, creative, generative force. The alien mother is not that. She is... Barbara Creed talks a lot about Freud, specifically in the context of Alien. You can maybe see why Freud would get invoked. But despite the fact that the aliens are shaped like penises, Creed thinks that they, as these creative forces, are meant to represent a sort of pre-phallic force of both violent creation and destruction. What we see aliens do in this movie, I'm sure they have their own whole rich interior lives, but from the point of view of humans, what these aliens do is they impregnate humans and they kill them, and not necessarily in that order. And at some point in the process, they are reincorporated into the whole via the wall goo. It's this whole sort of twisted circle of life. As Creed says, the alien is the abyss, the cannibalizing black hole from which all life comes and to which all life returns. The generative, procreative principle. Ash, the science officer, who is also a cyborg, delivers a eulogy to the eponymous alien of the film, which could be a description of this mother. I admire its purity, a survivor unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality. And from a male perspective, I can see why a creature like that would be very horrifying, particularly if it is coded as a mother, because mothers are supposed to be very clouded by conscience, remorse, and delusions of morality, right? Like, your mom is the one who's supposed to nurture you and take care of you and to teach you how to be a good person, because obviously you can't rely on your dad to do that. And to have twisted a force like that to make it into something that exists only to use your body for reproduction and then rip it apart and either consume or discard it, it feels very, very wrong. From the female perspective, that's just kind of like how it feels to date men a lot of the time. Again, Yeah, that's not frightening in the abstract to a lot of women, unfortunately. And that is what makes Ripley such a compelling hero, is because she is aware of those stakes from the beginning. That's why she's like, no, you should quarantine. Because if you don't quarantine, the bad thing could come and get you. And if you've never been gotten by a bad thing before, you don't necessarily understand the level of threat there. Speaking of mothers that don't behave the way that they should, I think the scarier female monster in this movie is that of the enabler. And I think that is what Mother, meaning the ship, represents. So she is both the brains and sort of ultimately the arbiter of the fate of the Nostromo. And to be clear, we are now sort of moving away from Barbara Creed's theory into my reading of this character. Character? Do we call Mother a character?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, she certainly has a voice. So we're forced to assume that Weyland-Yutani chose to give their ships, their ship AI systems this name. I don't know if we see it spelled out in this movie, but in later movies, Mother is spelled MU-TH-UR. Which stands for something, I'm sure, and it's supposedly like a coding languages that all the androids speak or whatever. But for the human characters, Mother is sort of filling the role of caretaker in meaningful ways. So when they're out on these trips, they're out in space for long, long periods of time, and for a lot of that time, they're asleep, being taken care of by Mother. She runs on autopilot when they're all asleep, and she's supposed to be the one who takes them home and makes sure they get there safely. She's the one who wakes them up in order to respond to this beacon. And Mother is the entity they turn to for answers and even for comfort in times of distress. You know, you see Dallas going and asking basically to be comforted when he realizes he's probably about to die. Ripley turns to Mother when she wants answers about what's going on with Ash. They are more or less helpless to her if the ship starts to malfunction in any way. They can't really do anything about it when they're out in the middle of space. But Mother is a product owned by the company, right? She doesn't answer to the crew on this ship. She doesn't even answer to the captain. She does what the company programs her to do. And as such, she is not going to intervene to help the crew members. And ultimately, she doesn't have any actual nurturing to give them. She can't tell Dallas whether or not he has any chance of surviving in the vents. She doesn't soften the blow for Ripley of the company saying, we don't care if you live or die. Even Ash, when they plug him in and they're, asking him about his directive or whatever, he has that line about, I can't lie about your chances, but you have my sympathy. They don't get that from Mother. They are all just at the mercy of this abusive benefactor, an oppressive intergalactic enterprise created and run by men who are obsessed with profit and violence and ultimately immortality. That's why they want these aliens. They want maybe to make weapons, but they also, some guy somewhere wants to live forever. And those men put this female-coded AI on their ships to provide the illusion of a caring maternal force in their midst. Like all enablers in abusive situation, Mother never moves beyond that illusion.
Inalienablers.
Inalienablers. Yeah, so at best, what Mother can do is stand by and watch this patriarchal company destroy and harm people, and at worst, she's going to actively bring about their destruction. Overall, in Alien, none of the trappings or manifestations of motherhood are natural, and none of them can be trusted. And even if the alien itself is male or is being sort of read as male, or, at least as unisex as all the human characters are, that is what makes this still a monstrous feminine story, even if we don't actually see a monstrous woman or female character on screen. Aliens is going to deal with motherhood a little differently, but we're going to get to that. Okay, sell me on Aliens. You like this movie a lot. Why?
This is one of those movies where I think it was cool to see woman in 80s movies do thing that woman in 80s movies don't get to do, which is use big gun and shoot big monster. And I think that's good. And also, I just know that we're so far past one-dimensional gendered or non-gendered characters at this point in film history that I guess it's just not that important. But for people that grew up watching Rambo and what's my guy's name? Steven Seagal.
Steven Seagal's your guy?
He used to be my guy,
Oh, boy.
I was raised on Steven Seagal movies. So, like, to just see a woman do things like that and not as the plucky sidekick to a Beverly Hills Cop or whatever, then it's pretty cool. And I'm also not someone who watched a lot of sci-fi, I guess, growing up. And boy, howdy. I mean, I feel like that's a genre that's riddled with a lot of just like...
Still to this day.
Blatant sexism. So, yeah, I mean, I just think like that's an important part about this movie. The other thing I like about it is it ridicules and satirizes hypermasculinity. It doesn't just give us a strong female protagonist. It gives us bonkers, idiotic, marine expendables, literal expendables, and layers it by giving us a commanding officer that's just utterly incompetent. I don't know. You're just kind of sitting there. The horror of this movie is the dramatic irony that we, the viewer, know that Ripley is right at every turn, that there's nothing these idiots can do to best the xenomorphs. And yet, until they are in their own death throes, they don't reckon with that. They refuse to accept that. And they refuse to accept that the authority of this badass woman is something that they should even begin to trust. So, yeah, I just think it works on a lot of levels. And it's like, it's fun. It's fun at the end to see Sigourney Weaver getting a freaking mech suit and just like, robo bash an alien. It's fun. I like campy, cheesy action like that. Yeah. Okay, and then now we're going to talk about all the ways in which it's like not great, and I agree with those too. So
I think that you're absolutely right, and I don't think that a lot of the things that we are going to talk about throughout the discussion are actually like things that make this movie bad. I think they're things this movie is saying. I think this movie has messages that are uncomfortable, but I don't necessarily think that means the movie is bad. I think that means the movie is saying something to the audience that the audience, if they think hard enough about it, will find uncomfortable, which is what art is arguably supposed to do.
That's fine, but also there are just some things that you and I both agree that make this movie worse than it could have been. Like,
yes, certainly. And
there are flaws that don't exist in the original Alien.
Sure.
So that's like a knock against Aliens.
It's undeniably cool and important to have had, especially in the mid-1980s, which is peak Rambo, Die Hard, Steven Seagal, all that kind of stuff, to have a character who just fits in that space, is a woman, and in no way has to sort of explain her presence there. At least in our minds at this point, Ripley is one of the great action heroes. And that is very, very cool. And I absolutely don't want to take that away from anyone. And even like Vasquez, who... I was
just about to bring her up.
Yeah, is a highly stereotypical depiction of a Latina character and like is being sort of strangely sexualized. We talked about that, the fact that she's just gets up out of her pod and starts doing pull-ups in her underwear or whatever, where it's just sort of like, okay, the fact that she is a little bit more androgynous in appearance does not mean she has fully escaped the female gaze, and obviously, like, very obvious racism directed towards her. But it's still, like, that's two cool women on screen in the 1980s in an action movie, in a genre where, like, for the most part, women just kind of sat around half-dressed and did nothing.
Right.
That's very cool.
The female gaze? Or was that a little Freudian slip for you?
No comment. No.
Yeah.
I meant the male gaze. Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Well, what's interesting about the male gaze in this like hyper masculine 80s action genre stuff is like what people don't really want to talk about is the like developing musculature of your Rambos and your Arnold Schwarzeneggers and stuff. That's also the male gaze.
Absolutely.
These like more and more bulky or more and more cut action heroes, they're also running around with their shirts off and like we were talking about Rocky 3, how much of just like
so oily. Why are they so oily?
Thighs you see jiggling around on the beach. Like that's the male gaze too. It's just doing something different. Like you're sexualizing a body not one that you want to have sex with, but one that you want to idolize and like make a part of your own identity. Like you're sort of lusting after the idea that you could be that. You could be that attractive, not that you are that attracted to this thing that you are objectifying. You're objectifying it so that you can imagine incorporating it as part of your own identity, these big muscles. And so like Vasquez is doing both of those things, which is funny. This is one of the interesting things that this film does in a not so like tactful way, which is give us this Vasquez character as a foil to Ripley. Because it's like, okay, you could sort of say to people in the 80s, hey, we want to have a female action star. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. So let's just take a woman and let's give her big gun, big muscles. Yeah. Like make her one of the boys and just like have her talk shit and make, pussy eating jokes at the dinner table or whatever. And then boom, you get Vasquez. Yeah. And I
just need to know where to point my gun.
Yeah. Yeah. She's got the biggest dick of them all, right? And like, I think that is super important to make you appreciate that Ripley is not that.
Yeah. And they do, in the scene where Vasquez is talking about where to point her gun, that comment she says is directed at Ripley when Ripley is trying to be like, we need to be really careful, guys. These things are very dangerous. Yeah. There's no obvious way to kill them. And Vasquez is like in front of a group of her male colleagues, feels the need to say this thing about pointing her big gun at something and shooting it. At least in my reading of that scene, felt a little bit like there's another girl here now and I have to like put her in her place in front of the boys.
Well, also, it's the same thing as the 1980s shoulder pad ladies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
This is hypermasculinity embodied in a female person. All you're doing is saying like, oh, in order for me to be respected, I have to be more of a soldier than these boys, or I have to be more of a CEO, tycoon, super capitalist than these guys in the office. I have to outboy them. And Ripley's not doing that. And that's ultimately what makes her a survivor in the first film and a hero in the second film.
Yeah. Yeah, I have in my notes that Ripley has this sort of trauma-informed competence in Aliens that she, of course, doesn't have in Alien because she doesn't know what she's doing in Alien. She has kind of learned from her own mistakes, and we don't see her floundering in the same way in Aliens. She is a lot more assured about what needs to be done to address the alien problem. Yeah. But she is still in a masculine-coded scenario where people are not taking her seriously, even though there are more women in the space now.
Cue that moment where Apone is just so tickled when Ripley uses the fucking forklift, Yeah.
Despite the fact that, like, that's been her job for months or whatever. Presumably you got to see her credentials. You knew that was a thing she did as a job, but it's still sort of like, well, look at that. The little lady knows how to use the mech suit.
I love it.
Isn't that cute?
I can't help but love Apone.
Oh, yeah.
God.
Yeah, I don't think having those two characters and sort of juxtaposing them next to each other is necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, like, the treatment of Vasquez by the larger script has some problems, but I don't know that having a character like that means that, like, oh, this movie is so sexist, it has a stereotypical butch female character in it. That's not a bad thing. I think it would have been better if we'd gotten, like, a little bit more of an arc from Vasquez. She kind of is the reason her boyfriend or whatever he is dies. Like, she shoots an alien next to him and it sprays acid on him and it kills him. That could have been an interesting thing to watch her process, and we kind of don't get that. But just having a slightly stereotypical female character is not necessarily bad. The racism is bad.
Yeah,
you could have just taken that out and it would have been fine.
Yeah, so the fact that Vasquez is, as you said, a little bit more stereotypically butch, that's not what bothers me so much. The racism part is really bad. I think what I don't like so much is that she seems to be less of a character and more of a prop. Again, I think the reason she's there is to just serve as a foil to Ripley. Anything about her own character development seems to be an afterthought, and that's pretty crappy. And I think a more egregious example of this is, do you remember the like pilot that's supposed to come pick them up.
Oh yeah, the other
girl,
like two other girls who show up very briefly.
She's just there to get murdered and like pretty grossly. And I think there's maybe one other female character early on in that boardroom scene.
There's a woman in the boardroom, and then the doctor who like checks Nude out for like one scene.
Oh yeah,
that's also a woman.
And then she just disappears. What happens to her? She dies.
Oh, she dies in the scene in like the basement when they're all just getting eviscerated. She's one of the people they specifically mention.
That's what I'm saying. Like that's more egregious to me than having a underdeveloped side character. It's like, okay, there's a trend in this movie to just use women as props and fodder, and then the one that you've kind of made an interesting character, you seem to only be characterizing her in such a way as to inform us a little bit more about why Ripley is cool.
Yeah.
And that's lazy and insulting.
It's very like pitting women against each other sort of thing. Like you're supposed to think that Ripley is a better action hero than Vasquez because the narrative spends more time with Ripley, and importantly, because Ripley is more stereotypically feminine in ways that we will talk about later.
Right.
She is set up to be very different from Vasquez. Not through any fault of Vasquez, but through the fault of the story and what sort of attributes the story decides are important in women.
Right. There's a few of these, like, soldier grunts that I would have liked to learn more about and appreciate more, but, like, it is so obvious that they're just there to die.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to skip ahead in my notes.
Please do.
That was a beautiful segue. We talked earlier about how there's not a ton of connective tissue between Alien and Aliens, aside from the alien and or aliens. And Ripley, of course, who's in both of them. But one theme that is very strong throughout the whole franchise is this idea of human disposability under capitalism and patriarchy and things like that. In the first movie, it is the worker is disposable to the company. In this movie, it is the soldier is disposable under the military-industrial complex. I mean, they do put these female soldiers in the story, but as we just talked about, the only one you really ever even learn anything about is Vasquez, and barely her. The other two women, one of them is killed off screen. One of them is killed in a spectacle that is mostly about a plane crashing.
Yeah.
They wanted to put a big explosion in there. And it reads a little like, well, we had to hire some women for diversity purposes. Like, it feels very like angry CEO deals with DEI thing where it's like, fine, I put some women in there, so are you happy now?
You want equal rights? Fine, you get killed like all the men. Slash, explosions.
Yeah, it's very like, oh, well, if women want equality so much, why don't you have to be drafted? And it's like, hey, did you consider that maybe no one should be drafted? Do you think maybe the draft is the problem and not the fact that women don't get drafted? Anytime we're sort of talking about the disposability of soldiers, at least in the US, where, again, there are more men than women in the military, for better or worse, we're talking about the disposability of men. And this movie exists in kind of a interesting cultural headspace when it comes to how the American public was thinking about soldiers. And the argument is that this is one of the many movies, much like the television show MASH, this is a Vietnam movie, at least according to some sort of popular discussions of it. I found an article in a journal called Vietnam Generation, a Journal of Recent History and Contemporary Issues from 1991, where the author kind of talks about how this movie might have struck the audience in 1986, specifically as it deals with the treatment of soldiers.
Alasdair Spark writes, Aliens is a film about Vietnam, in that it successfully taps into and exploits the codified mythology about the war which emerged and solidified in the 1980s via the avalanche of film, novel, memoir, and oral history, most of it subsequent to the first film. Aliens, therefore, is not so much about the Vietnam War as about America's perception and understanding of the war. With a decade plus of hindsight, it is a film about films about Vietnam. To give an example, the platoon is led by a cigar-chewing, hard-as-nails black sergeant, a figure of Vietnam iconography established via portrayals such as Louis Gossett Jr. in An Officer and a Gentleman, which represent honorable and professional soldiers in the ranks. Notably, the officer in Aliens is the inexperienced and incompetent figure of legend who causes the deaths of several of the platoon. All this reflects the general sympathy for Vietnam veterans provoked by the discourse of the 1980s, and contrastingly, the company bureaucrat Gorman is a negative figure. He tells Hicks that he isn't qualified to lead because he is a mere grunt. This civilian, like the CIA agent in Rambo, betrays the grunt and frustrates his use of full force against the enemy, a device surely rooted in a 1980s perception of the war and the grunt as its victim.
So there are these sort of like waves in the public consciousness in terms of like how we think of the American soldier in Vietnam, right? Like there were anti-war protests, and the choice is like you go to jail or you go to war. And the people who chose to go to war instead of jail were seen as terrible people. But as time went on, people started to see, again, the draft is the problem, right? A lot of people who fought in Vietnam were not there because they wanted to be there. It was that, or like, you go to jail and your family doesn't have money anymore and you can't hold a job anymore and now you're a felon for the rest of your life. And some people just were not willing to take that trade and knew that they were going to an unpopular war and then came back home and were treated like garbage. And then a few years later, people sort of realized, like, ooh, maybe it was like they weren't the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the problem is a war machine that we talked earlier in the episode about people being fed into a wood chipper. That's basically what that was for people who were drafted. They were just these like nameless, faceless bodies that were jettisoned across the planet by a government who didn't care if they lived or died and knew it was sending them across the world to do something sort of hopeless that only was gonna hurt them and hurt the people in Vietnam. It was bad for everybody except people who sell machine guns, basically. It took a while for the general public to see the individual soldiers as victims there, too. That is at least what Alistair Spark is arguing is what we are meant to see in these Marines and aliens. Yes, they're all kind of buffoonish caricatures, but ultimately, it's not their fault they're being sent off to die somewhere.
No.
Or instead of trying to make the galaxy safer or whatever that they probably enlisted to do, to just go and like, you're there to help protect an asset that will make the company money, which is money that you, by the way, will never see.
Yeah. Even the idea of why they enlisted, I think that's part of why these grunts are characterized the way they are. We have Sarge, Apone, right? And we have Vasquez to sort of clearly signal to us like, okay, well, this is a ethnically and racially diverse sort of cast, more so than we see in other aspects of this film and this universe, really. Why is that? Oh, because people who enlist do so usually because they need money or like they have fewer options. People who enlist are, and like, especially in the Vietnam era and after, like, it's typical that more marginalized groups, lower socioeconomic classes, non-white people are sort of shuttled into the war machine and then are kept out of higher positions of authority and pay even within the military, and that's who's targeted. Like, I don't know if y'all remember having military recruiters come to your high school
and
they
just set up in the cafeteria.
Like, just like intentionally try to find people that were like failing out of their classes or jocks that had some like career-ending injury, and they'd be like, well, we'll take you.
We'll pay for college for you. You'll never have to worry about money ever again.
Pretty much. And so like their intentions, these enlisted, these grunts, are pretty clear. They're out for adventure and to go get some Octavian poontang and to get paid and to kill bugs. Like, that's what they know to do. That's what they've been trained to do. That's what they've been rewarded and praised for doing. They're they're a product of their space nation or whatever, the Weyland-Yutani Corp.
Yeah. Well, and as we saw with that boardroom scene, there are just layers of secrecy within this company that are protecting everyone from everyone else, basically. Like, of course, Ripley goes into that meeting and is like, this thing is very, very dangerous. We need to be careful. And these Marines have just been fed a line of like, you guys are untouchable. You have the best weapons in the world. Don't let anybody tell you what to do. Don't ask questions. If somebody tries to tell you that you need to take a more nuanced approach, don't listen to them. So, I mean, they set up Ripley to fail, and they set up the Marines to fail, and they did all of that deliberately because the goal is not to kill the aliens.
Right.
The goal is to bring the aliens back.
Right.
And no one knows that except for Carter.
Right. The Vietnam comparisons don't really stop there. I'm just thinking about, like, that line of, you know, we're the most outfitted, baddest ass Marines this side of the galaxy. And it's like, yeah, that is what American soldiers would have been told when they go to Vietnam as well. And then suddenly they are just getting decimated in jungle warfare that they're absolutely not prepared for. I think about the scene when the aliens just like start crawling out of the walls. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh my God, they were here the whole time. It's like, yeah, they live here.
Yeah,
this is their home.
They're in the ceiling. They're in the floors. You can set up a machine gun in one hallway. And they'll just learn to avoid that hallway.
And furthermore, like, not only is this their turf that you are invading, but like you have absolutely zero intel. You know fundamentally nothing about these creatures, and you've underestimated them to a point where you're dead. You're dead.
Yeah.
You're all dead. Like,
yeah. Well, and it's the problem of the colonial mindset too, right? The idea that like,
that's what I'm
we as the advanced society should be able to go anywhere in the galaxy and just set up shop, and people will just let us, and there won't be any creatures anywhere who are able to overcome us. That is unfortunately like how the American war machine thinks of basically the rest of the world as like inhabited by less advanced creatures, which is why they do so many horrible things.
That's why I originally said that I like this movie better than Alien, because I like an anti-war, anti-colonial movie that sort of beats you over the head with the theme of like, see, isn't this bad? Isn't this a bad idea? Maybe we shouldn't believe so hard in imperialism and like the war machine.
Yeah.
Whereas the first one is just like, well, here's just some people trying to do their fucking job, and then they all just get murdered.
The first one I think is arguably anti-capitalist, but not necessarily anti-imperial, just because all we're encountering is one ship on one planet that has some bad stuff on it, and not like a whole colony of people set up somewhere where they should not be, and they know they shouldn't be.
Well, but again, like the layers of knowing, the colonists don't necessarily know that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like the crew of the Nostromo didn't know that they shouldn't go there. They were following protocol. They thought, okay, this is a hassle, but like we're doing the right thing. We're checking and just being sure that there's not someone we can help. Oh, wait, we're being fed. We're being fed to some larger machine. True to horror, it just bums me out. Whereas the action movie, I at least get to be like, yeah, Ripley was right. Yeah, she kills an alien. Yeah.
Well, we do get that. I mean, that's the transition for Ripley, right? From horror movie protagonist to action movie protagonist. I think you said earlier in relation to like if a male lead had been an alien, the question would have been like, how will he beat up this alien?
Right.
How will he go about doing that? Not how will, this character get away. In Aliens, Sigourney Weaver is now full like John McClane, where the question is, how will Ripley beat up this alien?
Right.
And they're sort of presented as equals, like Ripley versus alien mother.
Right.
Like that's the showdown. You're just sitting through the rest of the movie waiting to see Ripley beat up an alien.
And here we get to the fundamental difference in genre of horror versus action. Horror, if done well, leaves you with a haunting feeling of hopelessness, which Alien does. Okay, Ripley gets away, but everyone died. The alien's still maybe out there. The larger company sends its androids to do nefarious shit, and you're just like, damn, like...
Yeah, she just has to go on living in that universe.
Right.
Yikes.
She and Jonesy escaped, but we don't know if they're going to live, and also, like, what a bleak story, right? I feel bad now. Whereas an action movie is pure fantasy. It is fantasy. And like, obviously you can see that in this movie where Alien goes toe to toe with Ripley goes toe to toe with a giant alien, like in a fist fight. A fantasy movie fills you with hope. It lets you believe, if only for a moment, that people can do impossible things and dismantle these larger systems that would otherwise crush them under the boot heel. And I like that. I want to feel like I can fight the bad guys.
Yeah. And again, I don't think that's a bad impulse. The unfortunate thing about all of these movies is, as we talked about before, like, the real bad guy isn't even really the aliens. The aliens are just animals, essentially, that are doing what they have evolved to do, which is try to survive and reproduce. And that doesn't square with the goals of humanity, which is unfortunate for humanity, but it's not malicious.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably, Alien Mom gets mad at Ripley for torching her eggs. That's certainly a bit of the dynamic here. But for the most part, like, they're not hunting humans because they hate humans. They're just like, well, you're here and I can use your body to plant eggs in. Right. And so I'm going to do that.
Well,
the problem is the company.
Yeah.
And the company is still there. She has not done anything really to the company. That's
why this franchise can keep going, because every movie, for better or for worse, and they do get just like worse moving forward.
Yeah.
But every movie just reveals to us a single node in this larger network of the company spreading its malicious corporate tendrils throughout the universe. And it's like, oh my God, this is so distributed that the horror of it all is, I can't imagine a way to dismantle this. I can't imagine a way to punch this Nazi in the face.
Yeah, it's so widespread and so oppressive. I said we weren't going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about Alien Romulus a couple of times in this episode, but that, I think, is one of the things that it does pretty well, is show, first of all, we get to see some like planets we've never seen before and like types of people we've never seen before in that movie, but just the sense for that main character that she's just been like working in a mine her whole life, the same mine that killed her parents. And she goes to this travel office and is like, I've accumulated enough hours to be given leave to go somewhere else. And they're like, oh, we actually just increased the limit. So you're actually going to need to stay here for 15 more years.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, that's the ultimate horror of this thing, is it's extremely widespread. The company seems to be super solo dolo in charge. Like,
yeah.
And like, who do you hit? Who do you point your big gun at, Vasquez? Like,
yeah, well, and that's like the real tragedy of Ripley to me, is that she successfully made this transition from scared space trucker who's just like trying to get her and her cat out of a bad situation to badass action hero with like a full robot suit that she can use to punch aliens out into space. And she still has to wake up tomorrow and go where? Back to the docks to move more boxes? Like where? She can't go anywhere. There is no way to get away from this company. They own all the ships. Yeah. You can't go to a new planet where they don't exist if you can't get on a ship. They own all of the ships. There's nothing to do.
That is what's so scary about this franchise, is because like she shows up in the third movie and it's exactly what you just said. Like, she just has to go on living, and yeah, she's an action hero now. Cool. She's still in a horror franchise.
Yeah, you can't get away from the actual horror, regardless of genre.
And that kind of makes it worse. Like, if you're John McClane, but you're shooting Jason, well, guess what? You're gonna lose, buddy. Like, he keep on coming.
Yeah, it's an immortal monster in the tradition of the great immortal monsters of horror, except it's a galaxy-wide corporation, and it controls where you work and where you live and what you eat and whether you breathe.
It's kind of, I just realized this is sort of an eldritch horror in that way.
Kind of, yeah.
Because
it's got
like,
a lot of tentacles.
Well, we get the like physical manifestation of tentacle monsters that seem to be endless, but actually I think they're just like visual representations of the real Cthulhu, which is the company. Mm-hmm. You can put that on a postcard, because that was one of the smartest things I've said on this podcast.
Put it on a t-shirt quickly. And it goes along with the idea of body horror, right? So like the first movie is all about bodily violation via alien that is facilitated by this evil company in a very like literal way, where it's like they're going to let this alien put a tube down your throat and stick its, pointy tail through your chest and kill you in all of these like pseudo-sexual ways. And then we move into just wholesale, when you are a soldier, when you are a worker in a society where we allow companies to have this much control, then your whole body belongs to them. Yeah. And if they say you jump into that goo pit with your flamethrower and you go bring us an alien egg back, you do that or they kill you. Like, or Carter Burke unplugs your life support pod in space and then just jettisons you out. There's just no escaping the body horror.
Yeah.
It just looks a little less visceral in this movie because we get a little less of penis-shaped things penetrating people. You know, again, we're sort of subbing in a little bit of our understandings of the military as a sort of masculine affair, but how does it feel to watch this movie as a male viewer? Is there a sense that, like, these male characters in particular are very disposable in this movie?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, again, I think that was one of the things that made me like this movie originally better than Alien, is the pretty in-your-face commentary about, hey, isn't it messed up how we teach boys that the best thing they can do is get really strong and sacrifice themselves to die? Isn't it, like, literally stupid? See how stupid these boys are? That's how stupid you are if you believe in this enterprise. Yeah. And I'm like, damn, that is stupid. We see them exchange jokes and special fun moments with each other and develop relationships. And it makes you think like, oh, wow, they could have like lived, laughed, and loved if they didn't just have to die horribly.
It's even interesting to see the character of Gorman, who was presumably not quite raised to believe like you just get physically strong and you get a big gun. He was, you know, sold on a different kind of power, which nonetheless still exists within this capitalist fascist machine where it's like you will do all of this book learning, you'll become a real officer, you'll become a lieutenant, and you will have authority over people, and that will empower you to change the world for the better. And what you see is him just like get out into the real world for 4 seconds and fall apart completely.
Absolutely.
Because he has power, but nothing to back it up.
Right.
He has no actual knowledge. He doesn't have, like, common sense. He hasn't been gifted common sense, and so he is just effectively useless, but he's got his shiny uniform, and he gets to say that he's the lieutenant.
Right.
But that doesn't save him any more than it saves anybody else.
Yeah, and he, to me, is a sort of worse version of the grunts because instead of his physical body being the thing that he's been told to develop and then sacrifice, it's his mind that he's been told to develop but
other people's bodies he has been told to sacrifice.
Yes. Like, they're just pawns on a chessboard for him, and that's where he gleans his so-called power until, and this is the justice of the film, until someone realizes, like, oh, I can just, like, knock this guy out, or I can just, like, throw him off the control panel. Like,
yeah, Ripley just shoves him out of the way, and from then on, it's her movie.
Right. And so at least there's that justice of this, which is, like, these beefy grunts are victims in their own way, but they're not useless. Like,
yeah. Hicks is a much more useful person as the story progresses than Gorman is at any point.
Oh,
Hicks
man.
has common sense. That is the gift that the grunts have, right? Like, they don't come from such a place of privilege that they think nothing in the world can hurt them.
Right.
Hicks absolutely understands that things in the world can hurt him. He presumably has known that his whole life, and that is why he is like, here, Ripley, take this tracker. Here, Ripley, I'm going to teach you how to use a particular type of gun that might be helpful to you. We're going to be practical as we are moving through these steps, which is why the two of them get along so well.
Right. And ultimately, I think that's why this movie doesn't fall flat in its criticism of the military, because it does allow you to feel sympathy for these grunts, even if it doesn't fully characterize all of them, because we see that they are victims. They're not the clowns. Gorman is the clown. And, like, without the commanding officer being there for us to be like, oh my God, I hate this guy, you might get confused and think that this is trying to be like some irreverent poke at soldiers. It's not. It's clearly not. Like,
yeah. Well, and even like Gorman, you get a little bit of sympathy for, if only because Carter is also there, and Carter has information that Gorman doesn't have.
And
so there are layers upon layers upon layers of even within like this sort of useless desk jockey boy who, you know, it's his first mission ever and second mission ever, sorry.
Second.
But even the fact that they were like, we know how dangerous this place is. We're going to send the kid who's been on one mission before and doesn't know anything about anything. They did that so that Gorman would fail because they needed the leadership to break down so that Carter would be able to walk in and say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get those aliens. We're going to put the aliens in the pods. And if you don't like it, I will kill you. And I get to tell the people back at HQ whatever I want to tell them. Right. That was the plan from the beginning. So like Gorman was still just sort of raised to die.
Yeah.
He was just livestock, essentially.
Try as you might, you want to think about this as an action movie. It's not. It's still horrific.
Yeah. Well, I think, my understanding of horror or of action is that there is still horror implicit in it. And it is hard for me to have a good time with an action movie when I'm like, there are so many people in New York that the Avengers just killed indiscriminately. Like, this isn't fun. These people all had houses and jobs and you just leveled them.
That's definitely a sort of product of like the modern, like the 21st century revisiting superhero franchises and saying like, hey, but what about all that collateral damage? Hey, what happened after the blip? Or like, you know what I mean? Like so we're sort of like trained to think a little bit more about that now. Whereas in the sort of peak of action films, you didn't. If a building exploded, you're like, oh, well, everyone was out of there, clearly. Except for the bad guys.
Or if
that's
they weren't,
is there's
who
like
cares?
one-dimensional bad guys to get exploded.
Yeah.
And you feel good about it. And you're like, okay, well, everyone who got killed there needed killing. Because we saw them kill good guys already.
That, I think, is actually a thing that Aliens also kind of criticizes about the action genre by including Newt.
Yeah.
Because Newt's not a bad person. Newt doesn't work for the company. Her parents worked for the company, but they were the equivalent of grunts. And she had to sit there and watch them die in front of her, along with every other person that she has ever known in her life.
Yep.
And it's really hard to be like, hell yeah, blow that whole building up, and being like, oh God, those were just like people.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very hard to look at Newt and be like, yeah, isn't this a cool adventure we're having? Because she's like, no, my brother was 8.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm not having a good time. None of us are having a good time.
So, what do you want to tell us about Newt? Because you got some other Newt thoughts, don't you?
I got Newt. Well, I wanted to ask you first, how does having Newt in this movie affect your feeling as you're watching it? Because it's an action movie with a kid in it,
right,
and that can kind of go either way. So how do you feel about Newt and her role in this movie?
It's a Jonesy that can talk. Basically, on the level of like, why include a kid? Why include this kind of a character? It's like, because otherwise there would just be too many opportunities for Ripley to say, like, let's just nuke this whole place. Having someone...
Or let's all go down in a blaze of glory if we have to.
Right, yeah. Having someone there that's totally defenseless, that is worth saving, air quotes, makes your action heroes act differently. So, like, that's why so many of the classic action movies, there's, like, a hostage situation, right? I mean, I'm thinking, like, Lethal Weapon and stuff. They have to devise this whole plan so that they don't just go in there guns blazing, doing the thing that's most natural to them, which is getting themselves killed in a firefight.
Yeah.
From a plot point, I think that's why Newt is there. The thing that you and I both have issue with is, like, also from a plot point, Newt is there to, once again, serve as a foil for Ripley and help complicate our protagonist by allowing us to see Ripley as a mother figure or, you know, as a caregiver.
I would like to talk about Ripley in a second. I want to give Newt her time in the sun first, because here is the thing that I want you to take away from everything I'm about to say in the next few minutes. I love Newt as a character. I'm glad that mostly. I'm glad she's here. I actually don't think she's a Jonesy parallel. I kind of think she's like a Gorman foil. Gorman being the guy who went into a situation with no knowledge, didn't look at the maps, sent people in to shoot guns at a nuclear reactor, and then was like, oh no, get the bullets back, oh no.
Right.
Newt is an expert.
Right.
Newt is like the guy in the chair. She's like Ripley's right-hand man. If Ripley is the general, Newt is the one who's like, here's the layout of the building.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the time when all the aliens are going to be out and about and moving around. Here's the way that I already know they can move through this space, and here's how I've found to hide from them. I think Newt is a fascinating character because she is just the scientific expert in the context of this movie. Like, they have Bishop there being like, oh, I've experimented on that. Get out of here, Bishop. No one cares.
Yeah.
If we need to know something about these aliens, we're going to talk to Ripley or we're going to talk to Newt because they are subject matter experts. And, like, if anything, I think, like, Hicks is the Jonesy because he's just got, like, especially once he gets hurt, Ripley's just kind of carrying him. Getting him onto the ship, just like, there you go, Dwayne, don't die. Bye. I gotta go do some more heroic shit now.
I just meant
back.
that
No,
I meant
she
that
is there.
Jonesy was there in the first movie to make Ripley act unpredictably and give her stakes other than her own body.
Correct. Yes. In the first movie, Ripley goes back for Jonesy. In the second movie, Ripley goes back for Newt. They are parallels in that way for the most part.
And Newt gets taken at the end and Ripley has to go.
From Ripley's perspective, she is... But I am not Ripley. I am watching this movie from the outside and I'm like, you know what? She actually has a lot of valuable things to say.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas Jonesy is just kind of there to, like, scare you and then run away.
I'm a cat.
Yeah.
Just like real cats.
The problem with having a character like Newt, and now I'm going to get up onto my soapbox right quick, if you wouldn't mind.
Here we go. Let me just cue that soapbox. Take a jazzy walk to the soapbox.
We have got to get more sounds on our soundboard. Welcome to my soapbox corner. My problem with this movie and with the way Ripley is characterized within it, the thing that I hate most about this movie is that they gave Ripley a dead daughter. I'm not even that mad that they gave Ripley a daughter because, you know, it's a sequel. We need to reveal some new information about this character. It'd be weird if we learned nothing whatsoever about Ripley. So, like, Ripley's got kids. Weird that it never came up in the first movie, but whatever. Maybe she just didn't have that kind of relationship with her coworkers. She didn't want to talk about her kids. That's fine. They gave her a dead daughter. A dead daughter.
How awesome would it have been if in the opening of the movie, Burke is like, I'm still looking for your daughter, but we got to get in this boardroom. We can't, no one.
Yeah, we're trying to locate her. We can't.
We can't track her down. But then when the firefight breaks out and Burke is running around, if to like negotiate him not dying, if he's like, Ripley, I actually do know where your daughter is, and I'll tell you. But
if you protect me from these aliens.
You gotta get me out of here.
Ever since we have watched this movie, I've just been sitting there thinking, like, God, there were so many ways you could have used this daughter to make this a more compelling story, to up the stakes for Ripley, to create some more interesting sources of tension. And they just didn't do any of it. They left so much money on the table. And it drives me crazy as a storyteller to be like, you just plopped a factoid about your main character into one scene at the very beginning to never bring her up again for the rest of the story, to give more quote-unquote trauma to a character we just saw survive a horror movie.
Right.
And the reason that they did it, as far as I can tell, is so that the audience would understand why Ripley would feel compassion towards Newt, which is kind of insulting to me as an audience member, because first of all, we already know that Ripley is a compassionate person who will go back for a vulnerable creature when something bad is happening. See Jonesy. So if you tell me, like, yeah, she's the sort of person who would try to protect a cat in a bad situation, I wouldn't then be like, well, but she couldn't possibly also care about human children. That's absurd.
Why is she behaving so irrationally?
I would have had no problem believing that Ripley was the sort of person who, if a human child was with her in a dangerous situation, would try to do something to protect that human child. Right. That was not a decision-making choice that I needed explained to me. But especially once she gets to know Newt and finds out that Newt is like a generally sensible person who has some understanding of how aliens work and has her own survival instincts and is on the same page as Ripley vis-a-vis the aliens when no one else in the situation is, it would have made perfect sense to me. Like, oh yeah, these two are going to bond with each other over the fact that they're both like experts about aliens.
And survivors. Like, they're the only two that have so far survived. Yeah, that would have been compelling enough.
Yeah, they already have something in common. So tacking on this, like, don't worry, everybody. Ripley isn't one of those heartless, childless cat ladies. You can trust her around a child.
Can we, though? She's a deadbeat mom, sorry.
She's... oh, Lord. She's not. It's just hard to parent under a fascist space corporation's rule. It's like insulting to me as an audience member, and it is spectacularly lazy.
Yeah.
And it's particularly lazy because, sorry, what was her name?
Rebecca. Oh, wait, the daughter. Amanda,
very good. You get a gold star. You get a feminist gold star for the day.
I'm a good feminist.
James Cameron does not. She never comes up by name again. We were trying to remember last night. There might be like one point in passing where Ripley says like, oh yeah, my daughter used to do this, so I'm going to wipe your face now or whatever. Very minimally even mentioning that she has a daughter ever again.
I think she says it one time to Newt. One time, I used to have a daughter.
Yeah,
and she was about
like,
your age.
My daughter also used to go to bed at night. We never get anything specific about Amanda. We don't have any communication from her. We have no, like, stories about her trying to find her mom. Ripley doesn't bring up any, like, specific memories. Like, and there were perfect times, as we just mentioned, like, my daughter used to have nightmares about X, Y, and Z. And here's what I would tell her when that was happening. And maybe it'll help you too. And she could have, like, accidentally called Newt Amanda or something.
Yeah. God, I'm ready to write some Aliens fanfic right now because, like, between this and the, like, Carter Burke, Sophie's Choice of, like, look, you got to save me, okay? Let me inject this alien in someone, and I'll take you to your daughter, Like,
yeah, there were so many things they could have done and didn't. And I do want to issue a correction because last time we said that Amanda never shows up anywhere in the Alien franchise again.
Oh, yeah.
That is technically incorrect,
as
the gamers in the audience know.
Thanks, gamers.
Thank you, gamers. Thank you, gamers, for telling me about the game Alien Isolation, which is a game that I do know about and have, like, watched people play. It came out in 2014, and it is sort of a horror survival game where Amanda Ripley is trying to find out what happened to her mom. And she, of course, has her own encounters with aliens, because that's all that people ever do in this universe is encounter aliens. It's amazing that there are any human beings left alive in this whole galaxy, because there are just these aliens are everywhere. But that is not a movie in a franchise that started with movies.
A game is not a movie.
Yeah,
Come at me, gamers.
If you, like me, were interested in Amanda, and you, unlike me, watched this movie in 1986 when it came out, you would have had to wait 28 years to get any information whatsoever about Amanda. And of course, because we already know from the movie that she dies when she's like 65 or whatever, and apparently she got married or in some other way changed her last name, but she didn't ever have any kids of her own. We're so limited with what we can do with that character.
Yeah.
And more to the point, you would have to play a video game.
Yeah.
A, like, survival horror video game, which is not a genre that everybody likes to play.
Because aliens are scary.
It is, yeah, it's quite a scary game from what I've seen of it. That's throwing a bone to an audience who realized a part of this story was underdeveloped, and it is, more to the point, not something that James Cameron did. That was a whole separate team of people who made that video game. It is hard for me as a storyteller to see the inclusion of this story about Amanda in this very, very brief scene, never to be discussed again, as a very, very lazy storytelling trope on James Cameron's part, because he didn't trust his audience to see two characters on screen together, one of which is an adult woman, one of which is a child, and believe that there could possibly be any kind of connection with them if the adult woman had not squeezed a baby out of her actual body before. Even this badass space-faring woman who we get to see go full John McClane and put on a cool mech suit, that she is still incomplete if she has not had a child of her own. And she is incapable of forming human connections with other women and other children if she has not had a child of her own. And it is a trope that shows up a lot in media, and it makes me mad every time it does. because it's like, it doesn't matter how cool and badass and empowered your character is. She is still required to be a mother in order to be considered a full person.
Right.
And the type of caregiving that you could give to a kid who is not your biological child or a stand-in for a biological child that you lost can never actually love you, and it will never be a real connection if by the end of your interaction, that kid doesn't think of you as a mommy.
Right.
And that is really insulting to me.
Well, it's the same reason I'm hard on old JC for showing us two types of women. There's Vasquez and there's your Ripleys. You know, there's the 80s shoulder pad women, and then there's this more modern, sensible feminist hero. Aren't you proud of me for... Actually, excuse me. There are three types of women. There's also the woman that flies the plane who gets eviscerated, who is a nameless prop in slasher films. And see,
or
look
Amanda,
how elevated I am.
Who is also she gets a name, but she is a
killed
prop
off screen,
there to die.
Never seen. And I like, to your point, not only... This is where it gets extremely lazy. It's like, okay, you have this traumatized character, Ripley, who goes through a journey in this sequel to become a hero. And the way that you can think to fulfill her journey is not to confront the thing that is her nightmare fuel and to best it, and then to, I don't know, set up a plan to go and take on the larger power structures that are allowing these things to propagate and to just like chew people up in the machine. No. We're going to forget all about that because like, no, but we killed the big bad alien. Instead, let's make sure that we get a good shot at the end of Ripley with her new daughter and her new love interest because...
There has to be a nuclear family at the end of it. That's what it means to have a happy ending.
That's the happy ending. And it's like, no.
Yeah, well, and we talked last time about the fact that, like, Newt just watched her parents die. We don't know exactly how long Newt has been alone, but not long enough to forget who her mom was. Why? Yeah, all throughout the whole movie, she is calling Ripley, Ripley.
Right.
Why at the very last second make a point of showing her calling her mommy, especially since it's reinforcing this idea of like, it's a mommy versus mommy battle.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to the thematic material in this movie.
Sympathetically, did you ever accidentally call a teacher mom?
Sure. But that's not why you put something in a movie. The actor playing Newt didn't accidentally say the word mommy and they thought it was cute and left it in. They told her to say that.
Yeah.
And all of this just goes to what my big problem.
Here's the big one. This is the big one, everyone.
So beyond just the fact that James Cameron just invented a woman to kill because he wanted to kill a woman.
Fellas, you ever find yourself just sitting around at home inventing women to kill?
James Cameron does. But he makes movies about it.
For your next D&D campaign, consider inventing a woman. Then kill her. Off screen. Sorry.
For basically no reason. Have you ever wanted to completely undercut the thematic content of the first movie in a series? Invent a woman to kill. James Cameron says it works every time.
Do you hate the fabric of your franchise? Invent a woman. Kill her. Sorry, I could do this. That's very funny to me. All right, but it's getting hot in here.
It is good. Okay. Yeah. So the whole point of the first movie, the whole source of the horror is motherhood made grotesque, right? Like that is the fuel for the horror in the movie Alien. And as such, there is already a lot of imagery and thematic content dealing with motherhood and the ways that motherhood can become complicated, and maybe exposing some things about motherhood that are already sort of dangerous and horrifying. And, you know, as we talked before, there isn't even a female alien in Alien, but everyone who watches that chest burster scene can tell, like, okay, this is a violent depiction of birth. You know, we saw the eggs. We saw the tube down Kane's throat. We saw the shape of the alien's head. We get it, right? Mm-hmm. We didn't need someone to look at the screen after the chest burster scene and be like, kind of like childbirth, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? Because it's a metaphor. It's subtext.
Right.
It's storytelling tools that we use to do something interesting and complicated.
The monstrous feminine in the first one is so brilliant because it's not pointing to a woman you invented and saying, look, here's a villain.
Yeah.
It's instead saying, hey, you know that thing that we think of stereotypically as the thing that women do, which is make progeny?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that actually really fucking scary? Because you never know what's going to come out of the gachapon. It could just be the perfect organism that's hell-bent on raping and killing. Oh, you know, like most civilizations in history. Damn, that's scary.
Yeah, and more to the point, you don't know how the process of giving birth will affect you. It could be a beautiful natural process, or it could either be a process that results in the destruction of the body of the person who gave birth, or a process whereby the body of the person gestating the child becomes too dangerous and kills the child. Like all of these like horrible things that happen in real life.
Either
to
way,
bodies.
If it happens at the dinner table, it's gonna mess up your oatmeal.
It is. You are not going to want to have any pasta salad after that point. No. You simply won't.
No.
Even in Aliens, we see them kind of trying to deal with that thematic content, again, through Newt, who is a child. We've talked about how competent she is, and, like, it actually does make sense to me that she might be looking for new parental figures in the world because she has been on her own after watching her biological family die. But I don't need you to tell me that, James. I will see a child who has just watched her parents die and then be encountered with new adults who could potentially take care of her if they figure out how to navigate the situation appropriately, and be like, okay, Newt is maybe looking for a new mom. I don't need her to look at the camera and say, Ripley is my mommy now. Mm-hmm. We don't need to have characters standing around in the foreground being like, well, what if the mama alien is giving birth to the eggs and she is very protective of her eggs, and if you mess with her eggs, mama alien will have to come and fight you. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, I'm being reductive here, but...
Not by much.
Not by much. You don't make the subtext text, James. It just makes for a much less interesting viewing experience. And it also, the experience of watching Alien is the experience of coming to realize how horrifying certain aspects of the real world can be vis-a-vis, you know, rape and impregnation and stuff like that. Making Ripley into the nice mommy who needs to go and fight the mean mommy totally undercuts that idea of the archaic mother that Barbara Creed was talking about. It's just saying that, like, instead of there being this idea of reproduction as a sort of primordial, uncontrollable force in the world and something mysterious and worthy of respect, it's just sort of like, well, no, some mommies are bad. And what you need is a good mommy to go punch the bad mommy, and then all the mommies will be good because the bad mommies will be gone.
Right.
And that, to me, lets the audience off the hook from having to think critically about the idea of motherhood, and instead sort of forces us into that framing of alien mom bad, Ripley, mom, good, not Ripley as a female character navigating a fraught space with reproductive imagery. Just mom versus mom. The good mom kills the bad mom, and everybody gets to sleep tight at night knowing being a mom is still super important. It's the most important natural thing you can do. Every woman should do it. They just have to do it right. And if you're a mommy like Ripley's a mommy, the whole world is going to be fine.
And that, to me, is the worst crime of this movie because it distracts from the fact that the actual monster in the Alien franchise is the reproductive cycles of things like the company and the military and like all of these forces that are too large to be made manifest in a single creature that we already said you can't punch in the face. But those are the things that are producing monstrous results, right? These platoons of violent sociopaths, lovable, love them, but they're murderous, ill-informed idiots that just go into strange places to kill stuff, and that's not great. Like, it produces agents like Carter Burke who are willing to sacrifice human beings for a paycheck, some promotion. He doesn't seem to have any vested interest in the science of aliens or like
No.
Like, he's in it for the next big deal. Like, he's a Wall Street trader. Like,
yeah, they want to be able to make a serum you can inject into yourself and live forever.
Like,
nothing could possibly go wrong with that idea.
So again, like, yeah, I totally agree with you. We don't need a mother figure other than Mother. Like,
yeah, well, and I don't even have a problem with Alien as Mother, because that was still the argument in Alien, even though we didn't see whatever alien was laying the eggs. We just see her now. Mm-hmm. And I think it is totally fine to have an understanding, like, have a face to this archaic mother force. It births and it consumes, and that is the idea of reproduction that this alien mother is representing. Because that is, as you just said, the sort of theme of these movies is these giant, evil, faceless corporations are being represented by aliens that reproduce violently and then consume, and they just, they're using human bodies as farms for their own purposes, essentially, which is just what the company is doing. All of that is good.
Until you punch it into a vacuum and you're like, hooray, celebrate, we beat Bowser, the game's over. Like,
yeah. And instead of Ripley being a cog trying to escape the machine, she then has to take on baggage of mommy.
Right.
And that, to me, undercuts the idea of trying to use motherhood as a metaphor. It loses all of its steam when you're like, well, there's two different ways to use motherhood as a metaphor now, instead of zeroing in on harmful reproductive cycles. Because it's not actually about, I don't want this to come across as me being like, being a mom is bad. That is not what I am saying. And there are ways that they could have addressed Ripley as a mother that I think still could have fit in that theme. But by giving us so little information about her daughter and about their relationship and what kind of mother Ripley was in the real world, and not in this strange facsimile that she has with Newt, we don't get to have an interesting conversation about different types of motherhood. We just have Ripley as the ideal, this perfect, heroic figure who is also a mom now. And so now motherhood has to get sort of deified in a way that, totally undercuts what the franchise has up to that point been trying to say about reproduction and the horrors of these consumptive cycles.
Yeah. The more we talk about this, the more I'm like, gosh, I wish they gave Hicks a backstory of having a dead daughter,
that
basically.
Was my next point.
like it would be so much cooler if, like, Hicks, because, like, the other thing that's worth tackling in this film is the idea of, like, paternalistic care. So, like, you can read that scene of Ripley learning to use the grenade launcher as, like, oh, it's cute and it's rom-com-y and, like, they're learning to shoot a gun together and that's great. Or it's, like, practical and that's why she likes Hicks, because he's taking the time. But also, like, what we're seeing through his character in just that scene and a couple of others is, like, yeah, he's a caretaker, but he's thinking, like, he has to. Like, he's the man, and so he must protect the women. Points for Hicks come in scenes like the ones where Ripley says, actually, Hicks is the commanding officer now. He's the highest ranking military official here now, not you, Burke. Like, this isn't a company affair. And then to Hicks's credit, he's like, yeah, what Ripley said, that sounds like the best plan, actually.
Yeah.
Like, instead of, like, going on a power trip.
It is a waste in general to not have Newt interact with any character other than Ripley, essentially. Like, that also could have been a way to give any one of those Marines more personality, especially once they are in, they've had that first showdown with the aliens and they are in a survival scenario. Why is Ripley the only one who seems to care what Newt has to say? Wouldn't it make just as much sense for Hicks or Vasquez or, even like Hudson to be like, hey, this kid, you've seen what's going on here. What do you think we should do? Like,
yeah.
And it's just, again, because they didn't make a point to establish that any of the other characters had children, so they can't interact with the child.
Right.
Vasquez can't be trusted with the child. We don't know that she's ever had children.
Yeah.
And certainly the men can't be trusted around children, because, of course, men in general, even if men have had children, they can't be trusted around children. That's an assumption we have in our culture. Cool. Yeah. Everyone.
Even if Carter had a daughter, like, Like, that would have been fucked up, right?
That would have that would have been crazy. Like, to show a company man who went in extremely cynical, being like, I'm going to sacrifice as many of these people as I have to get this alien back to where I needed to go, to see a little girl still sitting there and be like, they didn't all die.
Yeah.
There is a witness here who is a child who now knows exactly what kind of person I am and can mirror that back to me. No, none of that. He doesn't care. He's a two-dimensional character too. He's nothing. Or a one-dimensional, not even two-dimensional.
He gets half a dimension.
He's no dimensional. He doesn't exist.
Dimension.
We're going full flatland over here. All the women are just points.
Yeah.
I mean, all of that garbage said,
Pretty good movie.
I still think this is a good movie. And hey, to really bring it home, it still deals with motherhood better than Alien Romulus does.
Yeah.
Boy, Romulus, you really fumbled the bag in the last 5 minutes of the movie there, didn't you guys? Did some real weird shit there at the end.
Great stuff with gravity and acid blood. Horrible mommy.
Cool sibling relationship dynamics.
Neato.
Loved that. I mean, all of that said, it's still a really good, fun movie. I do think, for all the foibles, it's super fun to watch Ripley navigate this movie. It is fun to see, like, a little girl do some kind of badass things. I like the relationship with Hicks. Like, I think that little semi-romantic subplot is kind of cute. It doesn't bother me. I think it's fun. I don't think James totally ruined it.
It was subverting a lot of meta-narratives that were being fed to us in predominantly male-led action movies, but in so doing still came with some of the gendered trappings that were 80s. So, and what are you going to do?
Instead of it being incidental as it was in Alien, it just felt very heavy-handed to be like, Ripley is a woman, gosh darn it. Look at her do the thing that women do, which is have baby and protect.
Women.
Baby. Women. Yeah, what did Aaron Sorkin write this script? Come on, man. Real quick, let's rate both of these movies. We'll do this. We'll do this part fast because it's been now a long time since we even talked.
Several hours.
How highly would you recommend Alien and or Aliens, and to whom?
This is so tough because it's like, I'm not going to recommend anyone watch Aliens if they haven't seen Alien.
Yeah.
I might give them the same rating because in my head, they're one movie. I like to think of these as like Karate Kid Part 1 and Part 2.
Sure.
Where you should just watch both of them. There's enough connective tissue plot-wise between the two of them that I kind of just want to give them one rating.
Do it.
It's tough because they are different genres. Like, some people just don't like horror. Some people don't want to see nasty critters do nasty things.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much spit in these movies, you guys. So goopy.
I mean, it's gross, and I mean, it's not as like horrific as some other ones, but this whole franchise does haunt me in a way that I keep returning to it. Like, all these things that we pointed out that are maybe not so good, it sticks with you. There's something timeless about this first movie and its first sequel. I mean, I gotta give it above a 7, probably. A 7 or above, with the caveat that it's not for everyone. I wouldn't show this to kids.
No, absolutely not. No.
8?
Yeah. I'm also sitting at about an 8. In terms of who could maybe get the most value out of this, I think, especially if you are watching both of them, it is kind of good for, like, in my mind, people who are ready to start sort of dating seriously. It feels like if you're like a heterosexual man, you need to learn to respect the Ellen Ripleys in your life and listen when they talk. So if you think Ripley is a cool character and you like watching her hit things in her mech suit, then you need to listen to your girlfriend when she asks you to stop doing something or to, like, wear a seatbelt while you're driving. Yeah. That is what I think, because women are not nagging all the time, you know? Right. Sometimes you need to at least consider what they're saying and possibly act upon it.
Yeah, we talked a lot about how specifically Aliens does a cool thing for, the young women watching in the 80s, which inspires them to think of themselves as action heroes and, like, opens up a new realm of fantasy for them. But for young boys, it opens up a new realm of reality, which is hey, there are competent women and you don't always see depictions of them in the media that you watch, but you need to get used to it, bub, because otherwise you're going to be one of these grunts going in and getting eviscerated, or you're going to think you're smarter than everyone only to like be totally destroyed, like in a more savage way, both intellectually and then physically. This is why teenage boys should watch Ripley.
Yeah. And if you can find it in your heart to carve out some compassion for the Lamberts and the Vasquezes of the world, too, that will only improve your life even more, I think.
Yeah. There are still teens, tweens in 2024 who have only watched the stuff that their parents have shown them, and so much of it is like propaganda that, you know, like me at that age, they think...
Yeah, they've stumbled into the embrace of the Andrew Tates of the world.
Right. Yeah.
That's arguably worse.
And not for nothing, the fact that we do have more diverse roles and, you know, higher gender equity in media these days, for a lot of people, there's a reactionary movement against that of like, all this woke crap, all this like diversity for the sake of being diverse. Yeah. And it's like, no, like women can kill aliens too, damn it.
Well, and also in real life, dangerous things happen to women and women have to address them as often as dangerous things happen to men.
Probably more often.
Well, that's the whole part of Alien, right? This is the first time you as a man have encountered this bad thing. This has happened to me every time I've gone on a date with a man.
Yeah.
So do you maybe want to sit and listen when I tell you maybe what you should try to do to protect yourself?
There you go.
It's broadening your horizons when it comes to your understanding of expertise. Right. Sometimes the man in charge is right. Sometimes he's wrong. And if all of the women around are saying that he is wrong, they can't all be wrong, you know?
Right.
Not all the women can be wrong all the time.
Yes.
Broaden your horizons.
Yeah, this is a movie about understanding the differential of credibility and authority. Like, different people have different perspectives, different levels of trustworthiness based on that. And you need to learn to recognize that. And that's our embrace nuance moment of this episode.
Yeah. It's coming up on Halloween as we're recording this. It'll be past Halloween when we post it, but...
Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas, everybody. Have a weekend Alien movie marathon.
Yeah, well, yeah.
They're good.
You know, and I talked about the third one a little bit. You should watch it. Just the third one. It's a trilogy, and then Ripley's gone, sort of, maybe, kind of.
Yeah, and then maybe go play all of Alien Isolation.
Yeah, tell me how that goes.
Yeah.
I'm not going to play it.
Yeah, it looks too scary for me.
Scary.
I like scary movies. I don't want to play scary video games, though. I'm too much of a baby. We bailed out of Halloween Horror Nights at Busch Gardens after like 10 minutes.
Go ahead and cut that out. I don't want anyone to know about that.
Oh, God. You know what? We're human, too. And we listen to our instincts, and my female instinct said, I don't want to watch some 15-year-old getting paid 10 cents an hour to run a chainsaw. I just don't want him all up in my business. And that's fine. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just for a bit of housekeeping here, the next couple of episodes that we have coming up will include, hopefully, if everything works out, some special guests.
Ooh.
So good news for those of you who are tired of just listening to the two of us. But it might mean that we will not be able to keep to our exact every 2 weeks schedule. So it might be a little bit more inconsistent. We're going to try to stay on schedule as much as possible. But we might be taking an extra week in between some of these as we try to get folks' schedules to line up.
But that's okay, because that'll give you plenty of time to go back and listen to our wonderful old episodes and maybe tell a friend. Maybe rate, like, subscribe, and buy something in our merch store.
We don't have a merch store.
Just send us money.
Send it in the mail. You'll figure out find us.
Put a $20 bill in the mail.
Just write our names on it and throw it into the wind, and it'll find its way to us. I promise. Don't do that. Officially, don't do that. Stay tuned for our next episode. It's going to be a real barn burner.
Yeah.
We'll see if it even happens.
Maybe.
If we can find a good way to talk about the South Park movie.
Ooh,
so look forward to that. We will see you next time for more, I hope for some more compassionate conversations about masculinity in media. We will see you next time.
See ya.